المشتاق لا تنمي هذه أنوار ذي سلمي عن قليل أنت في الحرم عند خير العرب والعجم
قف أمام القابر بالأدب
أيها المشتاق لا تنمي هذه أنوار ذي سلمي عن قليل أنت في الحرم عند خير العرب والعجم
قف أمام القابر بالأدب
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الفاتحة بنية التعلم والتعليم والتذكر والتذكير والنفع والاندفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على التمسك بكتاب الله وسنة رسوله والدعاء على الهدى والدلالة على الخير ابتغاء وجه الله ومرضاته وقربه وثوابه سبحانه وتعالى. على ما علم نبينا سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم وعلى ما علم محمد وأخلاقنا في أخلاقهم وطريقتنا في طريقتهم بالقبول وإلى حضرة النبي سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. بسم الفاتحة. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. رب اغفر لي ولوالدي وللمؤمنين آمين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم. Okay, so this week inshallah we will be covering the doctrine of kasab or acquisition, okay, which is the share of creation, or the creation's share in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's actions. Okay, not literally share. Okay, this is as a metaphor which we will see inshallah in the course of today's discussion. Okay, but before that, we quickly review the problem of evil last week. Okay, so last week we decided, or we clarified that this problem of evil which some people face is neither a problem, right, for us, nor do we consider it properly to be, or in any sense actually rationally or logically to be evil. Yeah. So it's not a problem for us because we are Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's property, right? He does as He wills and there is no overcoming His will, right? Masha'Allahu kana wa lam yasha' lam yakun. Okay, and He told us, right, so he in fact, you know, he tells us in the Quran that we are supposed to anticipate tests, and then we get news or we experience something we're displeased with, right, or there's some loss or some pain or some hardship. And it's sunnah for us, the Prophet taught us sallallahu alaihi wasallam to do the istirja', which is to say inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. It's inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. A lot of people tend to drop the extra alif, right, for the jama'. Yeah. So he told us to anticipate tests. He warned us that we would be tested, right? But he also gave us the means. Alhamdulillah, out of his kindness, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us the means, right, and the proper ways to react to these tests, these tests that he's going to set for us. Okay, and when we react in the proper way, then these tests become sources of everlasting happiness, inshallah. Right, so examples are, he prescribes when we're tested that we should have keep a good opinion of him, right, subhanahu wa ta'ala, that we're patient, right, that we help others. Okay, so the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was sent, right, bashiran wa nadiran, right, as a herald of cheer and as a warner as well. So he warned us, right, with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He conveyed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's threats and promises, and he conveyed also many incentives for us when we're stuck or facing some difficulty or facing some test or trial. Then he's brought a lot of good news for us. So for example, he says in a hadith, or kama qala sallallahu alaihi wasallam, no pain or difficulty befalls a Muslim, right, not even as much as a prick of a thorn, except that Allah expiates his sins. It becomes something Allah uses to remove him of his sins, or rewards him further. Okay, of course, this kind of thing, it would, to deserve the clause, right, the condition must be met, right? So that means one must behave as a Muslim would behave, right, in the face of difficulty or trial. So again, he says Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala helps his servant, right, as long as the servant is helping his brother or is trying to help his brother. Okay, so these are all, at least they help soften the blow, right, and they help fix the perspective of someone who is undergoing tests and trials. So this is thanks to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So observing the correct adab, the correct courtesies, or the appropriate manners when faced with tests by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, these tests then are turned into the biggest blessings for us. Okay, so it's not evil either. We don't say this the problem of evil, we don't say that it's evil, okay, because it's absurd to have imposed human rational categories on the infinite, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and his master and his plan and his decree, his will and his decree. Okay, nor is it good manners, obviously, to entertain bad opinion or poor opinion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, our reason it's not up to the task of understanding the infinite, right? Therefore, it doesn't make sense for us it's not something, Allah's decree, Allah's will is not something that is within the realm of our rational judgment. Okay, so if that's the case, then it's not even possible for us to judge anything to be evil, or as anything else for that matter. We cannot make any sort of judgment. Okay. Now last week we mentioned Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala khalaqa at-ta'a wal ma'siyah. He creates obedience and disobedience, right, among everything, in between everything else, right? Habib Ahmad bin Zain rahimahullah says that specifically, he says that Allah creates obedience and disobedience, so that he created disobedience, right, might have raised some eyebrows, or raised some question marks, right, among people who read this text, right? And some of these question marks, and this will be addressed today, inshallah. Okay, before we get to the concept of kasab, right, we have to take a bit of a detour, right, through Islamic history. Okay, to get a better picture of the contribution of Imam Abul Hasan al-Ash'ari. It's not the case that the Muslims at that point, they were obviously Muslims, right, because they were generations succeeding the the Sahaba and the Tabi'in. Yeah. It's just at that point in time they were trying to systematize and set down in a systematic fashion or clearly the central beliefs in Islam, right, as a theological system. Yeah, so in that process there came, many different people came with their ideas, right, and interpretations of the Quran and the Sunnah. Yeah. And they arrived at many different positions, right, most of which were extreme, right, either excessive, either extreme or defective. Here are the positions until Imam Ash'ari settled these issues in the 4th century. Okay, so before Imam Ash'ari came to save the day, right, and of course for the Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, we also believe we not only believe that the correct madhabs in Aqidah are those of Imam Ash'ari and Imam Maturidi as well. Yeah. Okay, so the debate at the time in around 100 in the 1st century, maybe after Hijrah, right, the Mu'tazila dominated the debate and the positions. Okay, and they were rationalists. Okay, and they believe that man creates actions, right? Okay, so in this debate, which is premised on or focused on the status of actions, okay, the actions of creation. Okay, in this debate, the Mu'tazila argued, right, that only man creates actions, right, without any help from God subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, they said that if God created man's actions, then punishment would be injustice. Yeah, if God was the one who was truly doing these things, right, then acts of disobedience, for example, then why would God then punish the one who did that? Yeah, the creation that did that, the servant who performed that act should not be punished if God is the one who is truly the true doer. Yeah, so now there is some truth in that it appeals to reason. Okay, but this is an example of the true word, right, but through which is intended falsehood. Okay, so this is the position of the Mu'tazila. Was one end was that man creates his own actions without any help from God. In fact, if God did create actions, had any share in that, then punishment would not be just. Okay, on the other extreme, right, were the Jabriyah. Okay, from Jabr. Okay, was that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates actions and man has no share in it. Okay, so what they're saying is basically that God is the only doer, and of course it's also difficult to reject this, right? Like earlier with the Mu'tazila, they say that it would not be fair, right, if God was the one doing it to then punish man. That appeals to reason. Right? This one also is a bit more difficult, to reject, right, on its face at least. Yeah, they say that it's only God who truly does anything, any action, right? And therefore it's only God who creates actions, and man has no share whatsoever in the actions that are created by God. So man is like a feather floating in the wind. Okay, so they are the opposite extreme of the Mu'tazila, right? But based on this understanding, they took advantage of it, right, as a pretext to live hedonistic lives and commit the most heinous, the most evil acts, while at the same time maintaining that they were not at fault because God is a true doer. They were doing God's work, so to say. Okay, so between these two extremes, right, came in the end, right, our hero, alhamdulillah, rahimahullah ta'ala, rahimahullah abrar, Imam Ibn Hasan al-Ash'ari. Okay, so he created he arrived at a middle ground between these two extremes, right? So that he would not fall into either extreme. Okay, is that his doctrine of kasab, okay, or acquisition, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone is the one who creates the actions, but the servant acquires the actions. Okay, the intention belongs to the servant. Right? In acting, the intention belongs to the servant. The action itself is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, the action is created by Allah alone, right? But the servant chooses the act, and inclines towards it, and therefore, because of that, is responsible and accountable for the act. Okay, it's only Allah who has true efficacy, right? Who can truly effect anything independently. And the action is described to Allah by way of creation, and to the servant by way of acquisition. Okay, so that should be that's his position. Clear, it should be clear enough. Okay, so for example, we have the story of Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam. So he was told to sacrifice his son, Sayyidina Ismail, right? Both of whom were prophets alayhi salam. Okay, so he made a decision, and he was about to sacrifice his son. He chose to perform that act, to sacrifice his son, right? And because of that, by choosing that obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right, he earned Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's good pleasure. He earned Allah's pleasure and became Khalilullah, Allah's friend, right? On the other hand, we have Nimrod, who tried to burn Sayyidina Ibrahim. Okay, so he committed the act. He did that action, right? But although Sayyidina Ibrahim did not in the end burn, right, he was still responsible, right? He is still accountable or responsible for that intention. Okay, so the similarity between the two cases is that with Allah, Sayyidina Ibrahim had already had the conviction and was about to carry out his action, right? Allah did not put the power, the necessary cutting power, in the knife that Sayyidina Ibrahim was about to use to slaughter Sayyidina Ismail, right? Similarly, he withdrew the power of the fire, right, to combust, to burn Sayyidina Ibrahim, right? Instead, in the Quran, for example, Allah says, right, Ya naru kuni bardan wa salaman ala Ibrahim. Allah's command was for the fire instead to become cool and peaceful, okay, and safe for Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam. Okay, so this is the doctrine of kasab that Imam Ash'ari provided us, right, as a middle way to get out of get out from between the rock and a hard place, which is these two doctrines of the Mu'tazilah and Jabriyah. Okay, so in fact, Imam Ash'ari was himself a Mu'tazili, right, formerly, right? He followed his teacher al-Jubba'i. Okay, but after some time he had arguments with his teacher, and his teacher could not really answer, and he was dissatisfied. And in the end, he saw that the Mu'tazili position was not true. Yeah. So one day he came out after Jum'ah. He got onto the pulpit, right, into the mimbar, and he announced loudly to the world, right, that everybody who knew him, and whoever did not know him, I am so and so, son of so and so, and I used to be, I used to follow the Mu'tazilah, right, and that now I repent and I have nothing to do with them or their thought anymore. Right? He made a public declaration like that. Okay, and it said that he's arriving at this middle ground was because he was inspired in a dream of the Prophet ﷺ, who told him not to follow either extreme, right, but to find a correct middle ground. Yeah. So may Allah reward him, and of course, inshallah, until the end of time for being able to being given the honor of setting straight for us, right? Systematically our Aqidah. Okay, so in the text, right, this has to do with this part of the text. Okay, so Imam Ahmad bin Zain says, ila anqa radiyallahu anhu nafa'ana bihi fi ad-darain khalaqa al-khalqa wa a'malahum. Right, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is incumbent upon us to believe, is wajib for the Muslims to believe that Allah created mankind and the actions. Okay, so khalq actually includes, right, creation includes man, angels, jinn, etc. Okay, but because man is the greatest creation, right? So this Sheikh Abdul Aziz Ahmad, in his translation, he puts man there as a translation for khalq. Okay, now the servant's actions are one of two kinds. Okay, the actions of a human, for example. Okay, now we're just focusing on mankind. Okay, so the actions are either voluntary or involuntary. Okay, involuntary actions are those which Allah creates within a man, right, or being, in which there is no choice. So, for example, trembling, right? Even if you chose or you will to stop it, you will not be able to, right? Trembling or the beating of the heart, you know, or tripping for that matter. Okay, so there is no taklif in these actions. There is no legal responsibility. So if one were to sleepwalk, right, while one was sleeping, one started sleepwalking and went to the neighbor's house and killed the neighbor, right, while still being asleep. So legally, you know, even under the civil law, right, it is not considered. It's not concealed. It's not culpable for that. Okay, the other kind of actions are the voluntary actions, right, which is the rest of the actions that we're going to be concerned with from this point on. Yeah. So Allah is the one, subhanahu wa ta'ala, who creates his actions within a living being, right? And he has choice. Yeah, the servant has choice, and Allah creates ability along with that choice. Allah creates power in the servant, right, to do the act. So in this case, legal responsibility applies, right? There is taklif on these kind of actions. You know, we want to look at what makes up an action. Okay, so when we want to act, right, at the most basic level, a thought comes to mind, right, or there are a few different thoughts, right, a few different possibilities, from which we choose one, right. Our will inclines towards one, and once we've made that choice, then we start to move, right, which involves power, right, to realize that action, to realize that will, okay, or that choice. Okay, so when Allah wills, for example, right, what's happening is when Allah wills a certain, some sort of voluntary action, right, within his servant, right, standing or sitting or walking, okay, and he causes this to come to the servant's mind, right, as a thought that I want to do such and such, right, I want to stand, for example. And he places a means for its creation, right, which is the servant's choice of doing that thing, okay, which implies also his will, right, or his inclination. When the servant chooses this and directs himself towards it, he begins to move towards it, and Allah creates it, right, that will within him, and creates the power along with it. Okay, so at every stage Allah is creating. Everything belongs to Allah. This power that Allah creates for him to perform the act, right, is connected, you know, and it's related to voluntary actions, right, without it possessing independent efficacy. So that power itself, right, is created and is not It's not something that is essential to the servant who is trying to stand. Okay, it actually is derived or borrowed from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, so like other means, Allah creates with that power, but not by the power. Okay, so now this knowledge, will, and power, these attributes are called arranged attributes. Okay, I'll give you we'll go into an illustration of kasab, okay, in the next slides, inshallah. Right, but for now, follow the theoretical part. Okay, so the knowledge, the attribute of knowledge and of will and of power, these attributes, right, are called arranged attributes. Okay, arranged in what sense, right? Because they have there's a relationship between them, a logical or an ontological relationship between them. Okay, in that sense, they are called arranged attributes. Okay, because to perform an action, okay, an action presupposes power. Right? You cannot act unless you have the power to act. Okay. Similarly, okay, you would not similarly the power to act, right, presupposes that you have decided what it is you want to do. Okay, means the will is that it presupposes the will, and will presupposes knowledge. Okay, so if you want to do something, you need the power to be able to do it. You need the strength to be able to do it, the ability to do it, right? Okay, and to do it means before that you would have already, before moving the power or engaging the ability or using the ability to do that thing, you would have first decided what it was that you were going to do. Okay, and this would have been chosen from maybe a few different options, or something that you obviously before you want to do something, you have to know what it is you want to do. Okay, so in this sense, these attributes, knowledge, will, and power, in this sense, they're called arranged attributes. Okay, the action is not possible without power, right? Power would be meaningless, right, if not directed by the will, right? And will would be empty if not filled out by knowledge, or if not determined by knowledge. Okay, so now these attributes also showcase for us how we share in some of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's attributes, right? Of course, this is metaphorical, right? We only share in Allah's attributes in name, right? Not in reality. Okay, so this shows us, that also the meanings of when we have from here we get it's a reflection of the meaning of the hadiths of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right? He says, Allah khalaqallahu Adama fi suratihi. Allah created Adam alayhi salam in his image. Okay. Or when Prophet tells us, takhallaqu bi akhlaqillah, adopt or have practice the akhlaq of the beautiful character of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, so it is in this the sharing in the name, right, that Allah has knowledge and we also have knowledge. Right? We share that name, we share that attribute. Okay, or rather we share the name of the attribute, not the reality of the attribute. Allah has a will, we also are endowed with will. Allah has power, He also endows us with power. Okay, so in this sense that when the Prophet says, that Allah created Adam in his form, right, is that the human being has the form of the realities that only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala possesses. Okay, but the reflections of these, the metaphor, on a metaphorical level, we share the names of these realities, but not the realities themselves. Okay, because those are only for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, so what the process, right, that goes into, it's not really a process. It's not the logical order, right? The order is not a temporal order. It's not an order in time, right? It means I think first, then I make the choice, and then I gather the power or the ability to do it, and then I do it. Right? Everything comes pretty much, when we think about it, it's pretty much all at once, right? So it's not really divided in terms of time, but in terms of logical order. Yeah, just to reiterate that point. So for example, with Sayyidina Ibrahim, Sayyidina Ismail alayhi salam, Sayyidina Ibrahim was presented with the command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, so he had he held that thought or that knowledge from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with regards to the action. Okay, and then he chose to perform that. Right? His will inclined towards that. Okay. At this point, when he made that decision and his will inclined towards performing, towards sacrificing Sayyidina Ismail alayhi salam, and Allah created in him, in Sayyidina Ibrahim, right, the will together with the power to do it, right, to actually perform the slaughtering. Okay, but what saved Sayyidina, or rather why was Sayyidina Ismail not in the end actually sacrificed, is because Allah did not put the power in the knife. Right? The power to cut was not put in the knife that Sayyidina Ibrahim was going to use to slit Sayyidina Ismail's throat. Alayhi salam. Because of that, then Sayyidina Ismail did not die. But right, Sayyidina Ibrahim acquired for himself the reward of that obedience, right, the obedient action, right, because he already set himself to it. Okay, so that's an example of kasab. So the action itself belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? But the intention belongs to the servant. Intention, and therefore the reward or the punishment, right, belongs to the servant. For another illustration, okay, so imagine this scenario. Okay. So there's a key responsible for turning a lamp on and off. One day the owner of the key decides to hide the key in a secret place where his young child will not find it. Right? All the while the child has no idea that the lamp is only operated with the key. Now, this father wants to test the child. Right? He wants to see whether he will actually obey or disobey, right, his command. Right? But he wants to do this without the child's actual choice whether to disobey or obey, right, having any actual influence on things or any repercussions, right, actually. So he tells the child, don't blow on this lamp, right, because if you do, it will switch off. Right? If you obey me, I will reward you, and if you disobey me, I will punish you. And the father goes off to wherever he hid the key, right, a place from where the child can't see him watching, and he waits there to see whether the child will actually approach the lamp, right, and blow on it. So the child, now of course curiosity killed the cat, right? The child, according to his free will, chooses disobedience, right, over obedience, and moves to the lamp and blows on it. Right? At that moment, right, the same moment the child blows on the lamp, the father turns the key and the lamp switches off. Right? The lamp dies. Okay? So in this story, the child believes, definitely, he believes, so he's in trouble. Right? He believes without doubt that he is the one who caused the lamp to switch off, since he chose to blow on the lamp. And father already told him, if you blow on the lamp, it will switch off. Right? But the father knows that he is the one who's responsible, right? Because he used the real cause, the key. Okay. So with regards to the child, in this metaphor, we have a picture or representation of the child's acquisition of disobedience. Yeah. So the actual action was created by the actual action of switching off the lamp was created by the father, who has the actual means, the real means, right? But the child, in this scenario, is deserving of a punishment, right? Because he did actually he acquired for himself, right, the disobedient act. Okay, so again, the action is ascribed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right, by way of creation. So in terms of creation, there is no share in that, right? And to the servant by way of acquisition. So the servant acquires the action. He acquires he makes the intention, right, for which he is responsible, and through that he earns reward or punishment. Another way, I have to put it another way, if you rent a house, for example, right, the rented house is ascribed to the owner in terms of actual ownership. Okay, in terms of real ownership, it belongs to the owner. But in terms of the benefit or the use of that house, it belongs to the one renting the house. Okay, so these are the examples of kasab, right, or acquisition, which Imam Ash'ari put out for us to understand the nature of actions. Okay, this just to clarify further. Okay, when it comes to other customary means, right, other things that customarily we consider to be means, like for example that knife and how it cuts, fire and how it burns. Okay, because just now we were talking about human actions, right? And we're talking about non-human, correct understandings with regards to non-human actions. Okay, so if we believe that fire has independent efficacy that is essential to its nature, that lands us in disbelief, wal'iyadhu. Okay, we cannot believe that fire burns because it is essential, because it is fire. Fire has the power in itself to burn anything. Okay, we believe that fire has efficacy through a power that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala placed within it. Okay, then this goes against Allah's attribute of self-sufficiency. Okay, because everything is in need of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but if Allah put the power already, or put power in in a creation, and then that fire would not need Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to burn. So this is impossible. Okay, so this is a problem, misunderstanding or misconception. Okay, so there's this regarding there's disagreement, regarding whether these people are the people who believe this are outside of Islam or not. Okay, but that's the most correct position. Okay, is that it is not equate to disbelief. It is not kufur, right? But these people are mistaken. Okay, so another possibility, right, is that some people think that there is a relationship between fire and burning, a necessary, relationship. Okay, they believe that there's some inherent rational link between fire and burning, right? It's not in itself disbelief, but dangerous, because it might lead them to disbelief in miracles. Okay, because if you insist on a rational link between natural phenomena, right, that means they won't be able to accept when that link is done away with, right? When there are breaks in natural phenomena. In the case of the mu'jizat of the prophets, right, or the karamat, right, the miracles, right, or gifts of the awliya, right, of the saints, right, somebody might not be able to accept that the fire was cool for Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam, if they believe that fire and burning has a necessary link. Okay, and that could lead them to step outside of Islam. Because rejecting the inimitable miracles of prophets, that is kufur. Okay, so this understanding is dangerous. Okay, that there is insisting that there is a necessary rational link between fire and burning. Okay, so it's safe position. Okay, fire has no efficacy whatsoever, okay, except that which is created by Allah at the moment of burning or combustion. So this is correct according to the al-Sunnah al-Jami'ah. Okay, not just the Ash'ariyah, of course. Okay, so how do we properly understand the creation of evil acts? Right, if Allah is the real doer, why are we held responsible for disobedience? Allah says in the Quran, right, He is the creator of all things and disposer over everything. Okay, so in that case, if He created evil, right, then He must He be pleased with it? Right, is it the case that Allah should be pleased with evil? Right, so this is impossible. Okay, so His will, His irada, His will, His divine will is not the same as His command, His amr, or His rida, His pleasure, or His mahabbah. Okay, they are different things, they're distinct. Okay, and it's an important distinction to keep in mind. Okay, so in acts of obedience, there is a coincidence or correspondence between Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will and His command, His creation of that act of obedience and His command, right, and His good pleasure with that. This is what Allah commanded, right, and He created it, right, and they coincide there. Okay, but with regards acts of disobedience, okay, they don't meet. So anything that happens must happen necessarily through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will. Okay, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created this act. Okay, there is no share with the servant in this, okay, except, like you said, metaphorically. Okay, the reality of it is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone creates, not the servant. Okay, so acts of disobedience are by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will, but do not meet with His command or His pleasure or His love. Okay, He is not rida, He is not pleased with these acts of evil, okay, or disobedience. Okay, as a matter of courtesy with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, although the reality is such, right, that these actions cannot come from us, right? Yeah, but we don't say, we don't express it in that form that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created disobedience or evil. Like we say, ta'aduban ma'allah, if according to the demands of courtesy, right, with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we say that we ascribe all good to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and any evil to ourselves. Okay, so He says in the Quran, so anything that happens to us happens on account of the fruit of our hands, right, or the what our hands have earned. Okay, so any evil is brought to ourselves, right, by our own doing. Okay, so evil is ascribed to us, ourselves, right. In fact, in any case, the one who is evil is not the one who created it, but the one who acquired it. Okay. Plus, furthermore, our scholars have the arguments or the debates of the scholars. In the debates, they finally ultimately hold that evil is not in fact something that is a created thing in the first place. Yeah? So evil is not something that's positively created. It has no real existence. Evil is only in fact the absence of good. Okay, so it's not possible to ascribe having been created to evil, and therefore it's not possible for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to have created evil. Okay, ultimately. Okay, so that's it for this week, inshallah. So I hope the concept of kasab is clear enough, right, with the examples, right? And inshallah next week we're not done with when we're talking about kasab, we're talking about Allah's creation of acts. And of course, like I said, we're talking about earlier we're talking about these attributes which are called arranged attributes. Okay, so we can't talk about them in isolation from one another. Yeah, but we will be covering them separately, so that we will be doing qada and qadar, right, Allah's divine decree and preordainment next week, the week after that, right? This next 2-3 weeks, inshallah, 2-3 sessions we'll be covering this aspect, or this part of as we follow the matan, the text. Yeah, so afu minkum wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi wasallam wa ila hadrat nabi sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. اغفر لي ولوالدي وللمؤمنين آمين. صلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
يا ربنا اعترفنا بأننا اقترفنا وأننا أسرفنا على لظى أشرفنا فضلا وجودا منا لا باكتساب منا بالمصطفى الرسول نحظى بكل سول بالمصطفى الرسول نحظى بكل سول بالمصطفى الرسول نحظى بكل سول.